Welcome to Next in Queue, the podcast for contact center and customer experience professionals. Next in Queue is brought to you by Happy 2 Vision. Eliminate blind spots and see right through every conversation with Happy 2 Vision. Learn more at ajppitu.com. Now, here's your host, Rob Dwyer.
Thank you, everyone, for joining another episode of Next in Queue. Today, we are taking a trip really halfway around the world so that I can have a conversation with Luke Jamieson. Welcome to the show, Luke. How are you?
Yeah, good, Rob. How are you?
I am fantastic. I'm better than your mic, which...
Yes. Copped a last minute bit of brutality.
Yeah, it wasn't a full fatality, so that's good. It has been patched up and you're good to go.
Gaff tape solves everything, right?
Yeah, until it doesn't and it falls off. So if you hear any large banging noises in the episode, the tape is given out and Luke's mic is tapping out, but hopefully that won't happen. So Luke, you are joining me all the way from Australia. So what part of Australia are you in?
I'm down in Melbourne, so East Coast, down the bottom of Australia.
And I want to talk about how you first got into the contact center business. So what got you into that in the beginning?
Oh, it's a long story, but it's a short podcast. So let's keep it brief. And that is that, look, I was a baker pastry chef by trade. I got sick of that after about 4 years. Nights are long, and it's pretty hard to hold down friendship groups when you're when they're all going to work and you're all going to sleep. But I then sort of bounced around different things, spent a fair bit of time in advertising and marketing, and that brought me to Melbourne from Sydney. And I moved to Melbourne for a girl, as the reason most blokes are going to move. But marketing jobs were a bit harder to come by, and so I was like, I'll just take a call center job, just to make ends meet, just to get things going. And I stayed there pretty much for 15 years in that industry. I just loved it. And, I could actually see that there was a whole heap of room that things needed to be, shaken up, do things differently. And I saw it as an amazing growth area. So, yeah.
So pastry chef to contact center. I have to ask, what's the best pastry that you make? Do you still bake?
I still bake. I actually baked a loaf of bread just yesterday. I make sourdough every other day. So I'm still a big fan of making traditional sourdough. And I love a good croissant. You just can't, or croissant. Croissant. I love it. It has to be nice and buttery and crispy. So keep it simple.
So baking is a very exact science, as I understand it. Now, this is coming from someone who doesn't bake. It's not my thing. I tell my wife I cook to eat, and I'm pretty lazy about it unless someone else is eating, and then I'll try and take it up a notch. But just for me, like, whatever, as long as it's cooked. But that exact science, you describe yourself, and we'll probably have to do some background, as a larrikin, which tells me that you are also interested in doing things that is not an exact science. Can you tell me about that switch, and probably get us started on that word? I don't think most of my viewership is going to be familiar with that word.
Yeah, look, larrikin is a very Australian word. It's a term that means you've got a disregard for convention. Can be seen as a maverick, unorthodox, a bit mischievous, but ultimately a good-hearted person. So I say well-behaved larrikin because often they say that it can be they can be quite misbehaved. So that might be the only one that sits outside. But when I sort of thought of that when I come across that word. It's very built into our culture. My dad used to say, you're a larrikin. For me, it's such a good word for that brings in so many different aspects and summarizes who I feel like I am. So that's the larrikin. And you're right, it does deviate very much from that exact science of being a pastry chef. I love cooking because of the creativity that comes with cooking, but when it comes to baking and pastry, you've got to follow the recipe. Otherwise you can end up in a lot of trouble. Look, I enjoyed it, but it's, as I said, my whole family, if I go back, sort of the history of my family, they're all blue collar workers, right back to the first fleet, when we first, colonized Australia. And, I was the first person to go to university, in the history of my family, kind of thing. So I thought that I was on that same path, blue collar worker. But yeah, when I got into the contact center world and realized that there was, and look, I'd always sort of really gravitated towards leadership. I ran youth groups when I was younger, and always gravitated towards leadership roles. So when I saw there was this opportunity within the contact center industry to lead and to provide some different thought, and also creativity. You can be really creative in that space because there's just, with conversation, it can just go anywhere. Like this conversation, it can go anywhere. And that allows for this creativity.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So you spent a long time in contact centers, and correct me if I'm wrong, but they supported supers or that's probably a term. Yeah.
No, it's like it's like your 401k.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So I'm curious, like that seems like a very serious and straightforward topic that people are having. So how do you have fun with that in the contact center? And what were the things that you did? Because that, just in general, that doesn't strike me as the kind of topic where you have a lot of fun. But it sounds to me like you're trying to shake things up in that contact center environment that you were in.
Yeah, look, you're right. It's a serious business, but I think sometimes you take yourself too seriously, and we're all human, and just even little things like being able to apologize to somebody, there was always a really strict sort of, you've got to say no. If you can't do it, you say no. No doesn't mean you can't be empathetic and care for people. And, I always saw that there was this sort of cut through that we had to make in order to really connect with customers at a really personal level, and it's a serious topic. You're talking about people's retirement, they're about to finish the work, go out of the workforce, about to live the rest of their life in this new stage. And, you would be like, someone would call, be like, oh, I'm retiring, I want to withdraw my money. Be like, sure, let me just transact it and da-da-da-da. Instead of being like, oh, congratulations, like how amazing that you've done an amazing career. What are you going to do next? Like embrace those things. And this is when we talk about fun in a contact center environment, one of the challenges I always used to see was, particularly when I was on the phones, this thought that you can just throw pizza at something or wear a loud Hawaiian shirt and then that makes work fun. And I always had this feeling that if you're going to treat people like kids and have it like an adult daycare, then you're going to get that result. And for me, I think that the contact center industry is a really worthy industry. It's a worthy job. It's something we should be really, really proud of. You should be proud to work in that space. And it is a career. It's not just a job. And that was one of the defining things that I realized, that it was a career opportunity for me, not just to make ends meet, which I originally thought I was going to be. Which means that we need to stop that whole, like when you're at a barbecue and somebody asks you what you do, you don't sort of cough and say you're contact center. like we've got to be proud of that, right? And
Yeah.
when you embrace that and steer into it and see it for what it is, that's when you can have fun, because you're not trying to deflect all the things that we kind of put in place to make it feel like it's just a stepping stone role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So after roughly 15 years in that business, and at different stops along the way, you grew and had lots of different roles along the way. Then you started to branch out. So why did you decide to do something a little bit different? It's like, nice and comfortable. Were you too comfortable? What happened?
Oh, look, I feel like I've had a great career in the contact center industry, and I feel like I'm still part of that. But like we won Global Contact Center of the Year when I was working at UniSuper. Like when we talk about fun, that's when you can have fun. You can embrace that stuff. Like all the events and competitions and all that sort of stuff that go within that industry are really cool. But I also felt like I'd got to a point where I was, I'd led thousands of people by this stage, and one of the things that I really was I'd grown to have a real passion for is employee engagement. And how do you embrace all of the different people within a contact center? And a contact center obviously has got these really strict sort of KPIs. Like they're really defined. It's super measurable. You could pretty much measure how many breaths someone takes in a day sometimes, right? And yet we're all so different, and we all bring something different to the table. And there's the age-old argument where it's, you've got Billy over here going, man, I take like 110 calls a day. And then you've got Julie over the other side going, yeah, I take only 30, but I'm cleaning up half of Billy's mess because I'm doing a really good job. And this like, clash of quality versus quantity. And yet we need both. Like you do need both personality types. And what I started to see is when I'd studied this, I'd come across this thing, like a profiling kind of thing around gamification. And there was these four different profiles, these killers, achievers, socializers, and explorers. And when I started to look at how this had been developed, I started to look at the contact center and see these same sort of traits in how we approach things. And yet we were still measuring people on these sort of age-old KPIs, like lag measures, not lead measures, not behavioral measures. And so I started to gain this passion for employee engagement, gamification. And I tried and failed a number of times, like failed miserably a couple of times on some of those implementations. But I think we got there. He got there in the end, and again, won a few awards for the thought leadership and the approach and all this sort of stuff for it. And then all of a sudden, something started to happen. What we've all done. Before there was like gamification platforms and the likes, and we're all got leaderboards, and we're all putting stickers up on charts, and we've got whiteboards all around the contact center, all that sort of stuff, right? These platforms started to emerge, and they started approaching me saying, hey, look, we're struggling to sell this in, or we've sold it in, but we're not getting the engagement. And on the other side of things, I had all these businesses going, hey, I've seen you've done this really well. Can you help us? We've bought this platform and it's really not hitting where we need it to go. And so I saw this niche, and I took the plunge to create my business and start playfully and start consulting in that space. And look, it was a big risk. And look, it was not too long after, sort of 6 to 8 months later, COVID sort of hit, and all the challenges that came with that. But that's why I branched out. I saw that there was this niche, and I think that there is, if you do it right, you could get really great engagement. So that's why I branched out, and I sort of stayed in that space.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So today, you're at Centrical. You're a regional director for Australia and New Zealand. And as part of guess, everything that you do there. You also have your own podcast called Boost, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. Thanks for the plug.
Yeah, you're welcome. But I don't know if you know the significance of the names of the hosts of that show, you and your co-host, Laura.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with the Luke and Laura?
The Luke and Laura? No.
No. So in the 80s, there was a soap opera in the United States called General Hospital, and two of the most famous characters on that soap opera are Luke and Laura. So this is for you now. You know that you
we're going to have to do a General Hospital episode then.
You should. Because
Laura, take note. It's happening.
You share
Season 2, General
that
Hospital.
Pairing name. They're very famous. They were like a beloved couple for people that were into watching those shows. And my mom was a devoted fan of General Hospital. So this is how I know this.
Nice.
Yeah, I thought you should know. I don't want to talk about your podcast. It's cool. People should listen to it. But really, we're not going to talk about that. I just had to get in that you are Luke and Laura. That's all there is to it.
I'm going to have to binge a couple of episodes just to familiarize myself.
I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, if you're into soap operas, go for it. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube. It's just horrible plot lines that go on and on.
Days of Our Lives kind of style.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And
gotcha.
Aliens and divorces and, who knows what. There is something else that one of the things that I saw when I was looking at your profile on LinkedIn, and I was like, well, Luke and I are going to have a conversation about this. And you are a facilitator of something very unique. Tell us about that and what it means.
Now, are the Star Wars figurines in the back? Are they Lego? They are. Good. So yes, that's what you're referring to is the Lego.
So are these, by the way.
Are they really amazing?
Yeah,
they are great. Wow. Well. I never get into that amount of detail when we're doing Lego serious play, but it's an amazing. I find this an amazing medium to be able to level the playing field when it comes to psychological safety, engagement, and solving problems. When I first came across Lego Serious Play, and for just by way of background, it's using Lego to solve problems, and there's some really sound structures and theories and tasks that you do in order to get there. But what I saw the first time I'd come across it was that I was in a room full of execs and frontline staff. And you can imagine that for a lot of frontline contact center consultants, they are intimidated to heck by the executives, and they're never going to say the things that they should say. And yet the thing about Lego is you can't do Lego wrong. Doesn't matter how bad you think you are at building it. It doesn't matter. It's you can. There's this really cool exercise where you make ducks. I recently did it at a conference. I got people up on stage to make these ducks, and everyone gets the same number of tiles, and you've got to make a duck, and every single one of them is different. And you can't deny. Maybe you can deny some of them are a duck, but most of the time it's a duck. And I use that one for to represent the fact that we all have the same toolkit, yet we can have totally different results, right? And there's all these different things you could do with Lego Serious Play to basically drive solutions in a really psychological safe way. You can't deny how when you say build a tower with yourself in it, Now, some people might go and build a tower and put a little figurine, and the figurine is themselves. But the next person might build a tower, and it might branch out into 5 different ways. And the one arm is their family, the other arm is work, and the other arm, and it's very, it's a representation of themselves. And so both are equally as correct. And then you can take these models that people build. You might talk around what's the elephant in the room. People build whatever it is. You then bring those all together as one model, and all of a sudden people are having these conversations, having a bit of a laugh at each other at how bad the build is or how good the build is, and yet this conversation flows. And I found it to be just such a great level playing field for all people, because play does something really interesting. Play, there's a couple of things that play does. Play removes us from reality. Takes us away, and we're separated from reality, and so therefore a lot of the things that we define in reality don't apply when we play. The second thing is that when we use our hands when we play, and we become more tactile, it's almost like our hands do the thinking, and it allows us to sort of switch off some of the logic that happens in our brain. And allow just sort of this process to flow. And I always talk about this model called the Humunculus man. If you should look it up, it's this horrible, ugly statue, but it's a representation of how humans sense. So he's got really big lips, really big hands, big eyes, and yet, and that's sort of where the sensory parts of our brain and our body kick in. You know, it's when you think about kids, first thing they do, right, when they're little, hand straight into the mouth. Right? And so that's particularly with Lego Serious Play, it's allowing that to happen. It's allowing these sensory parts of our body to sort of all come together and take over and create. So that's why I find it super amazing.
Yeah, I find it super amazing as well. I had heard about that as a thing. I don't know, maybe within the last couple of years. How long have you been facilitating using that technique?
It'd be 3 or 4 years now. Yeah.
Has COVID, and I imagine things similar in Australia to the US, right? A lot of people working at home. Did that change? I mean, were you able to do that? Did that change how the facilitation worked? What happened there?
Yeah, drastically. That was probably one of the biggest challenges, is being able to come up with ways to do that online. And we using things like Miro to help with that was good. Sending out, packaging up like little packages and sending them out to people with the hope that they would one day come back. But once people get Lego, they tend to hang on to it. But sending them out and doing it online, doing it virtually, it made for some of those sessions where you connect different models together. That made it a little bit more challenging. But look, we managed. It's definitely not as good as in person, for sure. Now that the in-person events are sort of kicking back off, there's some extra safety precautions, like the Lego gets to run through the dishwasher these days, and yeah. But for the most part, yeah, it was challenging.
Well, don't use the hot cycle. I hear that can warp some of your pieces. So
yeah, it sure can. I learned that the hard way.
Yeah, it's not a good thing. That the hand washing is a little nicer on Lego, but it's, if anything, it's the dust. The dust maintenance is a tough thing to do, but if you're playing with it all of the time, it's not as big of a deal.
True.
So tell me about this role that you have at Centrical. What is it that you do aside from, being on a podcast?
Yeah, it's probably easier to talk about what I don't do. No, look, as part of my role, it was building the region here in Australia. When I started consulting, I partnered with a number of platforms right across the industry, in that gamification space. But what happened is that I kept going back to Centrical. I kept finding my way back to Centrical because I found that it was probably the most holistic solution to everything. So it's really easy, I think, to put points, badges, and leaderboards on things. And yes, that's gamification, but it's not very sustainable. You know, there's a lot of things that can go wrong with, particularly with leaderboards and badges. You know, if you're always at the bottom of a leaderboard, it's pretty demotivating, and you're getting the opposite effect to what you set out to achieve. Badges and achievements, digital achievements, again, a slippery slope. If you approach it wrong, they can become very condescending if you're just rewarding something that has no meaning. And so when I came across Centrical, they'd solved for a lot of those challenges, and good consultants are agnostic. So I started to become a very bad consultant because I was no longer agnostic. So it made sense. So we got married, Centrical and I, and we joined forces, and we kicked off the Australian region. So it's been a great ride. I've had to, what started off as one person has grown, and now we have a full team here in Australia. But at the time, I was doing everything. I was doing sales, I was doing marketing, I was doing pre-sales, I was doing demos, I was doing expos, I was, everything. And that's, as the team's grown, those pieces have been farmed off. I'm actually about to step into, or just recently stepped into a global director of marketing role, which is very exciting. I get to do more of what I'm really, I'm passionate about, which is sharing thought leadership, a podcast, other things that are coming up. So really looking forward to spending a bit more time on the brand and the marketing. But yeah, it's been a really joyous journey to move from consulting to working in a scale up. And it's also really been great working for an organization that really practices what they preach, so they're an employee engagement company first and foremost, and they do a really good job of that internally as well. So it's been, for me, it's been really great.
Yeah. I want to dig a little bit deeper into gamification. I mean, you talked a little bit about how it can go wrong, but let's talk about how it can go right, and what does that look like, and what do you get out of it from an employee engagement standpoint or an employee performance standpoint? I mean, what have you seen that really works?
Yeah, look, I think when you come back to sort of the behavioral psychology of it all, like what do we seek as humans, as employees when we join an organization? We want to have a sense of purpose. We want to know that the organization we're working for has a purpose, and that we're aligned with that purpose. We want to know that the work we're doing is meaningful and ties into that. We want a bit of autonomy, and we want to own what we do. That's a really important. We want to have a sense of progress, that we're growing ourselves. We want to have a sense of achievement once we have progressed, that we've made that milestone. And ultimately, we want a sense of belonging, but you can't get a sense of belonging without all the ones that I've just previously mentioned. And I think a sense of belonging is something that's really, really powerful, and it's a very hard thing to get to if you don't apply a number of those pieces, as well as coupling that with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And look, I think the DE&I stuff, it's become very common vernacular now, which is great. But I still think it's at its baseline, it's hygiene. Like, we should absolutely always embrace diversity, always be equitable, and always include people, and that's again why I love Lego Serious Play, is because it does that. It brings diversity of thought. Everybody's on an equal playing field when it comes to building, and it becomes an inclusive conversation. That's why it breaks down that psychological safety, creates that psychological safety. So all of those things, and how they tie back into gamification, is that when gamification is done well, it drives those things. So you things like stories, a good game always has a great narrative, a great story. And stories do a couple of things. One, it ties us to the purpose. It helps us have meaning to the task that we're doing. But it also asks a very important question, which is what's next? And so you're always willing to come back and try a bit more because you want to find out how that story unfolds. Storytelling is how, it's the oldest form of communication. You go right back to cave paintings, like we tell stories to share our knowledge. And so stories are a very important part. Through stories, you also can get that sense of progress as you progress through that story. And as you're growing and you're achieving and you're seeing things like your digital badges, your awards, you're feeling that meaning, that sense of purpose, you're feeling acknowledged, as long as they're meaningful, right? So you got to have, they should be a digital representation of the effort that you've put in, not just a digital representation of something that anyone can achieve. And things like so gamification does that really well by creating these moments that give you a sense of progress, a sense of achievement. It's a very social aspect, being able to see other people on leaderboards and when leaderboards are done well and they're dynamic and you can, you're always competing against people that you might have a chance to beat. You create this environment of iron sharpens iron. And it becomes a very social thing because you're like, yeah, well done, congratulations. And it starts to create conversation. So I think when you combine all of those elements together, it's very powerful. I think when you just take one or two of those elements, like a leaderboard or digital badging, you just miss so much of the purpose of why you're doing it. So all of those sense of meaning, belonging, purpose, as I mentioned before.
Yeah, there's a lot of intent that goes behind something that's executed really well and is successful in achieving what it is that you're trying to achieve. Without the mindfulness and the intent, you're probably not going to have much luck.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think if your intent is to just, and this I always talk about intent versus impact. If your intent is to just drive performance, then you've really missed it. I think you've missed the whole sense of what gamification should be. And the thing about performance is you require motivation. You require motivation, but you also require ability. So goals are set in place, and goals are asking us to change, are asking us to change our behavior to achieve such an outcome. Change requires motivation and ability. And if you don't have both of those, then you're going to fail. Motivation is a really interesting one because motivation is something that is not always sustainable. So motivation, I always think about like the old cars that used to wind up at the beginning. Like you crank the car to get it started. That's the motivation. It's like, hey, we're going to get you started. But then what's the fuel that's going to power that car to keep going and keep going? And you can't just keep saying, be more motivated, be more motivated, be more motivated, because it hits a ceiling at some point. And that's why you've got to tie it back to purpose and meaning. And really, once you do that, you definitely start to see that sustainable performance. And look, one last thing, and that is just around the ability side of things. We need to teach people how to be successful. And people want to be successful. People don't get up in the morning and go, I'm going to do a bad job. Can't wait to, they want to get up. They want to do a great job. And we need to enable people to do that. Now, the thing about ability and knowledge is that knowledge, when we learn something, we do something within ourselves. We add a value to that knowledge. Now, maybe not a dollar value, but we put a value around that knowledge. And once you value something, you want to nurture it and you want to care for it. And when you care for something, you want to continue to feed that. And that's what helps drive engagement. It becomes this virtuous cycle. And once someone's knowledgeable, feels confident in what they do, they're much more likely to stay at a role because they feel like they're adding value, they're getting value, and what they do has meaning and purpose.
Yeah, that's really great stuff. So, Luke, you've joined me, as we mentioned, from all the way across the globe. This is the great thing about technology, is that we can have this conversation, and you are literally on the other side of the planet from me. But I want to ask you about the part of the globe that you are on. What's the one thing you wish everybody knew about Australia or Aussies that they get wrong?
Oh, Rob, that's such a good question. I mean, I would love to tell you that we do all ride around on kangaroos, because that would be just awesome. And look, I'm not joking. Like last week, I was out in the country and I was running, and there was kangaroos left, right, and center, and there's definitely plenty of them around. What would I say? Look, we definitely do things differently here. I'll say that much. I think that we're an interesting bunch to sell to. We hate being sold to. So we'll pretend we're really not interested. Yeah. It's a while away. And then all of a sudden you buy it. And it's like, hang on, I wanted it implemented yesterday and it needs to be. So we're impatient once we buy it, but we'll pretend we're not interested for a very long time. The other thing I'd say is that, we're look, depending on where you are in Australia, we're pretty diverse. Melbourne, we love our coffee, big coffee drinkers. I'd say it's the capital. I'd say we'd beat out Seattle on that one. For coffee. So yeah, I could go on. Honestly, I could go on.
I mean, you had me at riding kangaroos, and you kind of burst the bubble a little bit, and I guess that's okay. I mean, they seem pretty scary to me, quite honestly.
Oh, not really. They're definitely. I think the videos you probably see online of people boxing them, which you shouldn't do, by the way.
Right.
They're definitely more scared of you. They see you and they try and hop as far away from you as possible. So they're an amazing creature. Really beautiful to watch. But yeah, they're definitely not scary.
Got it. Well, hey, it has been great having you on the show. This has been enlightening. I can't wait for you to check out General Hospital. And
yes.
You're welcome for that. So
Thanks
thanks
Rob.
for being on the show.
All right. So one last thing that you should know about Aussies is how we say goodbye. It's a colloquial term. We say hooroo, which essentially means hooray. Yeah.
Okay. Hooroo.
All right. So we're like, yep. All right. Hooroo. And it's like, I don't know if it's
Hooroo.
like celebrating that, hey, we're finished or whatever, but it's definitely something we would, we say. So on that note, hooroo.
Hooroo.